Good morning, everybody. So glad to have you all here today. As Jeremy said, this is the kickoff session of a 6-part series for the fundamentals of advocacy. It will be running from, well, today all the way until October, which seems like an eon away, but it'll be here before you know it. So I have the opportunity to kick this off and speak to you all about sort of like the very basics and fundamentals of advocacy. So for those that don't know me, my name is Briana. You can call me Bree. I am the Director of Government Relations and Advocacy here at the New York Library Association in Albany. So we are going to cover a few things. It's actually a pretty comprehensive agenda and presentation today, so I'm hoping we can get through everything. So we are going to, again, cover sort of the fundamentals. We're going to go over 2 different types of roadmaps, if you will. The first is the audience engagement map, and the second is called an advocacy map. Then we'll move into crafting your message. We'll talk about it from 2 different perspectives. From an individual perspective, which I believe most of us are going to be listening in today from that side of things, but also as a business or organization as well. There are some differences. And then we'll briefly be reviewing some advocacy tools. Now, I do want to mention for those on the line that we're really hoping for an in-depth perspective into those advocacy tools. We'll cover them, but I will be providing some supplemental materials for all of those that registered ahead of time so they get a little bit more detail that maybe they were looking for. And for my boss, Jeremy Johannesson, I promised I would put this slide in there. And for all of those who have been watching Andy Time at 11:30 on most days during the COVID crisis, today is Tuesday. So with that, let's get right into things, and let's start with the very basics. We're going to talk about what is advocacy. So it is public support for or recommendation of a particular cause or policy. Now, again, just to give you a little bit of background, there are 3 types of advocacy. There's self-advocacy, there is individual, and then there is system. So we're going to go into each just to give you a little bit of an overview. So for self-advocacy, that's what you would think about. It is speaking up for yourself. So what that actually means is that you're understanding your strengths, your needs, you're identifying those personal goals, and you're communicating those to others. You can think about this as like if you're walking into a room and when you are asking for a promotion or a raise, that's self-advocacy. Now, individual advocacy can actually be an individual, so one person. It can also be a group. So there are 2 common forms of individual advocacy. There's informal, which would cover your parents, your friends. It also is your grassroots organizations. Then there's formal individual advocacy, which could be an organization such as NYLA, it could be agencies, and oftentimes it's registered firms or businesses that have a paid staff member for the purposes of advocacy. And the last type of advocacy is system advocacy. Now, this is really about changing policies, laws, and rules and how they impact someone or a group of people's lives. So this typically is what we think about, or at least what I think about as a lobbyist here. We're targeting local, state, and national level policy changes and officials. So as far as today is concerned, while everything I talk about can be applied to all 3, we're primarily going to be focusing on individual advocacy and system advocacy. So with that and a little bit of laying the groundwork, let's jump right into that first roadmap, which is the audience engagement roadmap. So there are at least a dozen different definitions and structures for an audience engagement map, or an AEM, but its purpose is actually pretty simple. It's really just a method or a strategy to gain support by educating and creating opportunities for engagement. Pretty simple. I hope it sounds simple. So, as I said, there are at least a dozen different definitions and versions of an audience engagement roadmap. If you were to go on Google and type it in, you would find sources from private businesses to the public industry all over the place. And most of them, while there are different specificity and they try to tailor it to their particular market or field, again, it all comes down to three things: identify, educate, and then with the hope of action or acting. We're going to go over each of those three steps or those three categories in the coming slides. So the first step of an audience engagement roadmap is all about identify. So what I mean by that is who will eventually become your supporters and hopefully advocates. So you can do this in a myriad of ways, but it all starts with those who we would define as unaware. This is really the only step in, I guess what I would call this is an identity ladder, where both you or your organization and the individuals are, well, the same. So you're unaware of each other. You're floating around in this world and you're going about your business, but you don't know of each other. So this is really the most crucial step. So this is where data sources, paid or unpaid, sort of come into the process. Now, when I say data sources, those could be anything from, say, like a census or general surveys, government data, polling. There are lots of different, I would say, database marketing software and different systems out there that you can use. But I also, again, want to highlight that there are some unpaid and available resources to get that data out there. Now, once you have that data and once you've identified those who are in this unaware block, you would move to aware. So these are folks that maybe you've been able to identify through social media or a general email list. This is the very initial step or the first step in hopefully getting that individual to become an advocate. So some actions that we might see them take is maybe they follow your library or your organization on Facebook and they follow your page or they like you. So that way you start seeing them in your feed. Now, the next step would be an observer. That individual and this place in this line is what I would call like the most crucial. It's going from you're completely unaware, you're stranger, for lack of better terms, and trying to pull them to the side of being an advocate. Now, this person has taken the next step in engaging with you. Maybe they're receiving your e-newsletter. Maybe they're participating in a pledge. They're interacting on social media with you, but only if they are being given, say, an incentive, like there's an event or there's a contest, or maybe they're being tagged by somebody, but they're definitely starting to get into your inner circle here. The next step from there would be they become a supporter. So this is what we all want. This is the baseline that we are trying to bolster and we are trying to expand that network. So these are folks that show visual signs of support. So they're participating in petitions. Maybe they're taking part of general take action campaigns or something that all they need to do is fill in their general information in a form online, click send, but they don't really have to think about it too much. But it can go a little bit more than that. And maybe they're willing to have some swag. Maybe they have a yard sign in front saying support your library or I love my librarian. Maybe they have bumper stickers that say that they're an avid reader with the hashtag from your library. So they're taking it the next step, letting their inner circle and their network know that they dig you. So the next and final step, what we're all hoping for, is building that base of the advocate. So these are folks that are the most involved with the process, that first step in that audience engagement roadmap. They are the ones that are volunteering, they're attending meetings, they're participating in events, and those could be paid and unpaid. They are taking part in take action campaigns that involve a bit more detail and time. So maybe you're asking them to craft a letter, take photos, maybe participate on their own social media by sharing a independent, unique message. So they're, again, using their personal network to expand your base. And that's what we want. So again, this is building the first step of that audience engagement roadmap. You are identifying those who are unaware and building them up to that advocate. Now, let's talk about supporters, and I'm going to go back real quick. You'll see that yellow box, that fourth box, that supporter. That's that line that we want people to go from sort of engaged to we know we can count on them. Now, you might be thinking, does everyone need to go through this identity ladder that you just talked about, going from that unaware all the way up to an advocate? The answer is yes, but also no. And what I mean by this, to build your base, you'll need those who are unaware. But if given the opportunity right now, I'm sure you could name at least 36 individuals that you could classify somewhere else in that 5-block ladder. Hopefully, many of those would fit within supporter now. So for supporters, there are typically 4 types, which you see on the screen, starting from that center point, that yellow dot. Now, that is your relational supporters. Those are people that you know. Those are people in your circle that you could call or text on any given day and say, hey, could you do this for me? The next line out from that is ideological supporters. Now, those are, as it says, they have the same ideology as you, but you don't personally know them and they don't personally know you. This is a pretty common type of supporter within a nonprofit industry or within the public education industry, certainly our field of librarianship. The next, which is that dark gray sort of blue, is aversion. They're simply against the other guy. They are against your enemies simply for the fact of they don't like them and they like you. And that last, the biggest circle, is access. Now, those are individuals or supporters that would donate or support your cause because they want access to your power and your influence. Now, libraries, for the most part, and within the nonprofit realm, I guess I would say, this is pretty rare. While we can certainly provide access to resources and programs, I wouldn't exactly define libraries or the nonprofit industry as those having major influence over maybe money, authority, or policy. That's what we're looking to change. So now that we've gone through, again, and I'll go back really quickly, the sort of that identifying who your audience is, then we're going to move on to educating them. And I've sort of already given you some examples of that at each step of the way. So again, when you are unaware, you are just looking to give them the initial, identify them, give them the initial, this is who we are, and let them know that you're present, you're available, and the very basics of what you provide. The next is that step of aware. You're using social media, you're using that general email list to provide a bit more information about your purpose, your services, your programs, but you're not quite to the point that you are giving them an ask, or maybe you are requiring them to take action. Again, it's a really basic initial step of sharing information about yourself. The next step is the observer. Again, that's when things change. That's the line between the two sides. That's when you start providing your e-newsletter, pledges, you're interacting on social media in a much more granular and much more intricate way. You can start sharing those details about what struggles do you have? What problems? What are you looking to do? What are you looking to accomplish? Then you move on to that supporter. That's again, those are people that they're willing to take action for you. Go ahead, start using different data and different types of tools to educate and inform them. And we're going to go into that in a little bit. And then that last step, that advocate, you're really the advocate, they're the ones stepping up for you. Those are who you are sharing the most specific, most granular information with. So now that you have your supporters, or at least you've been able to identify who some of those folks are, and you are educating them and you're informing them on a regular basis, what do you need to do? What do you need to have them do? What do you want from them? If it's policy-based, and this can include legislation, this can include funding, maybe it's not policy-based, maybe you're just looking for them to vote. You'll need to identify a target audience. And before I move to the next slide, I should mention that the audience or target of that action can also be categorized as an eventual supporter or advocate. So they can become a part of that identity ladder. It can become cyclical, which is pretty amazing. So here are some examples of a target audience. So on your screen, you'll see some general categories. So you have elected officials. Those could be local, state, or federal officials. You have government officials, and I separated those for a reason because these can include some positions maybe that you wouldn't think of. They can be your municipal officials, like your county executive. They could be your city manager, heads of agencies. Then you have NGOs. Now I just listed two large examples. I listed the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the YMCA, but there are so many others that are not only, large that you would know about, but there can be some micro NGOs as well. You've got your media, which can be on I would call a micro level, which is maybe your town newspaper. You've got your local, that maybe that's your city. You've got your statewide and your national media. You've got businesses and business leaders. So those are either businesses or individuals within your community that have commitments to either the same cause or a similar peripheral cause that could be beneficial for you to know about. You've got your opinion leaders. So those are influential members within your issue area. So those could be your peers. Those could also be individuals, again, sort of working in a peripheral industry. So maybe it's somebody that works for a national association that is a part of your industry or field. You've got your professionals, and those are stakeholders and your credible sources. And then you've got your community. And for libraries, we have this unique sort of separation within the community. We can call our personal community, or those that frequent our libraries and our facilities, our patrons. They're a part of that community, but we could also consider the general public the community as well. Now, for me, I work with all 8 of these categories, and you may do the same, or find that on certain projects or campaigns, you'll only need 3 or 4 of these. Or maybe it's a matter of, and we're going to go into the advocacy roadmap in a few minutes, maybe it's a part of you end up speaking or engaging with each of these categories and members from each of these categories at different points of the process. So again, just some general ideas of who your target audience could be. Now, we've gone through the audience engagement map pretty quickly, but again, it's one of those tools and it's one of those depictions that can be described and defined in so many different ways. And I really thought for the point of today, I wanted to keep it really simple and just let you know that Really, it comes down to there's an intentional focus on moving an audience member from a spectator, that unaware or even aware, to being a participant by creating opportunities for connection. Hopefully, the next map or the advocacy map helps clarify any lingering questions that you have, especially under that ACT category, that last step in the map. So, and I just love this quote so much, it really just gets to the point that without a strategy, or even with a poor one, you are more likely to get lost and accomplish very little. So that's where a map comes along, and it's a perfect opportunity to move your strategy. So on your screen right now, you have the advocacy roadmap. Again, very similar to an AEM. There are lots of different versions of this, but I thought this really did a great job of that beginning to very end process. So we're going to go through each of these stops or steps along the way. So we're going to cover 1 through 3 first. So that'll be identifying the issue, setting the objectives, and identifying the targets. We're then going to move into steps 4 through 6, which will be developing key messages, considering partnerships, and developing an action plan, And then last but not least, we'll go through steps 7 through 9. And that's sort of the end part of this map and your strategy and your process, which is when you monitor and evaluate, you review and adapt, and then you follow up. And for anybody that has taken any of my presentations, webinars, meetings with me, you know that I love number 9. I love the follow-up process. I think it is one of those steps that so many of us, even as professional advocates and lobbyists, we forget about. So without further ado, let's get into steps 1 through 3. So again, number 1 is identify the advocacy issue. This is where you'll need to be specific in identifying your issue. It's essential to have a really good understanding of the challenge you want to address and a clear idea of how it could be solved. That second part, that set long, medium, and short-term objectives. This is your SMART goals. So many of you, I'm sure, know that adjective. But here, it's an advocacy strategy that has various objectives in the short, medium, and long terms. You want to make sure that you're defining them with precision to get through all of them. Number 3 is identifying the right targets. I have right next to it that AEM, that's the audience engagement map. That's exactly what we just talked about. This is the step along the way that you need to identify policy and decision makers who have the power to either introduce the policy changes that you want to propose or influence those that can. This is when you should ask yourself, what are the best targets for my efforts? Who has the greatest influence? Who are your existing contacts, if you have anyone, and I'm sure you all do, and which are the ones that are most or less sympathetic to your cause or the goal that you are striving towards. Again, this one, number 3, AEM, we're going to continue to talk about this. Next, we move on to steps 4 through 6. So again, each of these we will actually be talking about a little bit more as we go through today's presentation. So number 4 is define your key messages. This is where you want to make sure that your requests are clear and that your recommendations should be developed for a limited number of key actions to achieve specific, concrete, and realistic objectives. Again, it's all about those SMART goals. Make sure that if you're talking about a number of action items or a number of goals that you have, make sure at least in your head or those that you are working with, there's a prioritization list. That's key, making sure that you have a goals 1 through 3. Again, for anybody that has worked with me probably in the last 6 to 8 months, you often hear me say cold stone sizes. It is your like it, love it, and you gotta have it. So having those 3 levels is so important. Also makes me hungry. So talking about that, you want to make sure that you're tailoring your message to your target audience and the situation as well. Preparing different kinds of input depending on the type of meeting or the type of person that you're speaking with is crucial. Again, we're going to be talking about crafting messages very shortly. Number 5, consider partnerships and networks. That can go back to the audience engagement map as well. Although we really talked about the individual and then those categories of who your potential audience is, understand that within those audiences themselves, they have relationships with one another. Make sure you utilize those to your advantage. So working in a coalition with like-minded organizations can not only bring value, since it bears the potential to increase the pressure on your target audience, but it can really strengthen and broaden the network that your message is getting to as well. I do want to say that you should keep in mind that the larger the network or the coalition that you have and you're working with, keep in mind that that might also slow down the internal decision-making process as well. I'm sure you've all been a part of a project that the more hands in the pot, the slower it takes and the more review process it needs to go through. So just keep that in mind as you're considering those partnerships and networks. The last stop on this page is number 6, and that is develop a timely action plan. As you all know, timing is crucial for achieving results. Link your issue to a topic that is already either high on the agenda or that is receiving attention from the media or general public. Libraries have done a really excellent job at doing this, in my recent memory and in my brain of being a professional here. And we're even seeing it right now. A lot of the issues that our industry and the field and even peripheral public education, private education has been speaking about have really been highlighted and exacerbated because of the current pandemic. So this is a great time. Silver lining to all of this that is going on right now is to utilize that spotlight and bring it up higher on the chain. So again, develop a timely action plan. We are going to move into our last 3 stops on the map. Stops 7 through 9. So this is when you've gotten some action. You've developed your plan. You've started to act. You've started to move, and for again lack of better phrase, act on your initiatives. So now we're at the back half of your strategy and your plan. So number 7 is monitor and evaluate. So what I mean by this is take time to discuss the chosen strategy and its outcomes. This is when you want to assess what's been achieved, what follow-up is required, and which approaches need to be reviewed to better achieve your objectives in the future. So for me, this is the most common stop on that map of 9 different stops that you're going to continue to come back to. You should always, always, always be assessing what you've done and make sure that any follow-up that has been promised or maybe that would be helpful to move your strategy or to move your goal ahead, make sure that that's being done. It's a really easy step to forget. Number 8, review and adapt. This is a part on the map that so many people skip, or maybe they just don't care for, so that's why they skip it. This is where you review and adapt your strategy in line with the findings of the evaluation process. Know that if there are two different perspectives. Sometimes a goal, especially if it's lofty or if it's a major change from where we are in present or current history, it's going to take time. Not everything is possible to get past and to achieve, say, in a month or a year or even a session, which is 2 years. Sometimes it takes session after session, and it takes time. I've seen different pieces of policy take up to 10 years to pass, and so much of that is involved or tied to where are we socially, where are we politically, both local, state, and in the nation. So know that things can take time. But on the flip side, remember and try to keep in mind that there are a myriad of strategies. There are so many different ways that you can advocate in different angles and different perspectives. Make sure that you're open mind, you're opening your mind to those possibilities, and know that you can achieve your goal. Maybe it's not your, gotta have it in your cold stone size, but you can achieve your goal. And just because you have to take a step back or change or shift does not mean that you aren't able to accomplish that overall goal eventually. Maybe you just need to break it up. So definitely listen to that feedback you're getting. Be willing to pivot and change those strategies. And last but not least is number 9. It is your follow-up. Have policymakers taken the actions that they committed to? If not, follow up. Why? Why have they not? What more can you provide? Is it a matter of, as I just mentioned, the political climate? Is it just not, are there other priorities within the larger agenda that need their focus first? Or is there something that you can do? I do want to note that sometimes, especially when we're talking about the legislature or we're talking about policymakers or decision makers, no matter the level, sometimes personal contacts are the only way to obtain information that is otherwise confidential. So what I mean by that is maybe the reason why your goal or your action didn't move forward is not publicly available, or maybe it's not public knowledge. Maybe there's a reason. Sometimes if you can create, and again, this is all about relationship building, if you can create a relationship and a rapport within that office, you're more likely to get some of that maybe behind the closed door information. If you identify a blockage, try advocating at a different level. Use other entry points. So we've gone over the map. I'm going to go back just so you can see all the steps together. So again, going from 1 through 9, identify the issue. You're going to set those objectives, identify the targets. That's all in that audience engagement roadmap. You'll move to your developing your key messages, which is what we're going on to next. You're going to consider those partnerships. How can you utilize those in your network and beyond to leverage your action and your goal? You're going to develop that action plan once you've considered all of the players at hand. And once you've started moving and working through your process, you're going to monitor and evaluate, review and adapt, and then follow up. Again, this is a cyclical process. It can be anywhere from, a month, 3 months, a year, or heck, years. So now that we've gone through all of those steps, we are going to jump into storytelling and crafting your message, because that is, now that you've, again, identified your audience and you have this idea of what I want, where I want to go, well, how do you get there? How do you voice all of the details and the severity of the situation? Probably not the best use of severity, but I can't think of another word right now. So storytelling as a form of advocacy. So sure, most, if not all of you know this, storytelling is a powerful tool for advocacy. When it's done correctly, stories have the power to persuade and move people to action. This can be a part of that informing and that educating that we've talked about so much, but also in that action step. So in fact, stories are up to 22 times more memorable than facts alone. And they help make the case for why an individual, a policymaker, or your intended target should stand behind your cause, why they should listen, why they should step up and act on your behalf. We all have stories to tell. So choosing the one that resonates most with your target audience, in this case, an elected official, is key. When considering a story, you want to keep in mind 2 components that compel others to listen and take action: the main ask and who your audience is. So the ask is let your official or the staff member or your target audience know why you are there and what you want from them. That's your ask. Doesn't need to be in the form of a question. I just want to put that out there. I get that question a lot. As we talked about before, you want to be clear, you want to be concise, you want to be confident. Know who your audience is. Be familiar with who you plan to speak with. That way you can frame your story based on the values that you share with your audience and your target member. Consider the relevance to, as I said, your target or your audience. In this case, I typically use the policymaker. Make sure that there's relevance to them, their district, or how your story might reflect broader community issues. Before I move forward, this is a part where I don't have it in my slides, but I know when it comes to policy advocacy and all of you meeting with your elected officials, whether it be local, state, or federal, this is when you want to do your research ahead of time. Go on their state and their official website. They each have a biography. Typically, that's where you're going to find out maybe some personal information about them. Are they married? Do they have family? Where did they grow up? What was their profession before they became an elected official? That's also the page where you'll find out what committees or what caucuses they serve on. Now, I mention that because those caucuses and committees form, or that membership forms from two different places. The first is there is just an open seat and the Senate leadership or the Assembly leadership just assigns an individual to sit there. But more times than not, it's come as a request. That particular topic or committee means something to them. So whether it be the Veterans Committee, the Education Committee, aging, hell, it could be the Subcommittee on Libraries and Education Technology. Those are all requests to sit on those committees. So when you see that list of what they sit on, that flags to you like this is what's important to them. These are issues I want to make a part of that story. And the same thing for caucuses as well. So again, those official websites and web pages are so critical and chock full of information that you can use to be the most influential and effective advocate as possible. Moving on to story logic. So some of you on the presentation today may have attended the unconference through Winnie Lark. Now, myself and my colleague, Becky Chernobyl, did a program on storytelling. She is actually a professional actress, and so she came about this storytelling and how it could tie into advocacy from a really interesting perspective. And she actually gave the story of Romeo and Juliet. So I took her story spine that she talked about and I sort of shifted it to try to put it in the perspective for advocacy. So this is the story logic that I am presenting to you today. So the most effective stories follow a tried and true story logic, like I just brought up Romeo and Juliet. By including each of these components on the screen, you're going to ensure that you have not only a memorable story, but hopefully an exciting one as well. So for number one, setting the stage. This is where you're going to introduce not only yourself, but your hero. Begin by introducing yourself, your role within the library or the community. Think outside of your title here. So this is what you do for your community. What are the actions that you take to benefit the community? This is also where you're tying in the groundwork of your story. You're describing the setting, you're putting the context in, and you're establishing the stakes here. And number two, describing the challenge. This is where the problem sets in. Think of the main conflict that sets your story in motion. So this is where in the first few sentences, whether it's written or verbal, you want to hook your audience by making them want to know what happens next. Give them a promise that where your story takes them is going to be worthwhile. You want to make sure in here, between step 2 and 3, that conveying the struggle, you're highlighting sort of the problems, the struggles, why you need action to be taken. Again, this is all about that hook. Struggles can be internal, they can be physical, emotional. They propel the story forward. They create that tension, that suspense, and that excitement. Describing your struggles in a vivid language or with strong adjectives and key details will certainly keep your audience, and in this case, a policymaker in my brain, really captivated. The next is the intervention or the turning point. This is where you want there to be a moment of, for lack of better words, discovery. It's the moment of greatest tension that leads to the resolution or the main conflict. So again, we're sort of working up and now we're about to come back down. The next is show resolution. This is where you want to describe how the conflict has been resolved and tie up any of those loose ends. So hopefully all of your gears are turning and you're thinking about a story you've been a part of. This is where you want to link your story to a broader context. This is where you want to connect with the policy, the ask, the goal, with the actual audience or target member you're speaking with. This is where you also want to introduce the potential for success. So number 6, you're reaching closure. This is the final well-crafted sentence or statement that you leave with your target, your audience, your policymaker. Re-emphasize the importance of your story and make sure you reiterate that ask that I talked about before. And that ask doesn't need to be a question. It can be something much broader. It can be a statement. It can be, a non-actionable item. So to give you a little bit of a visual of what that means and what I just talked through, this nice little graph on the screen. So again, it's all about building up, providing information and details as you go around, making sure that that audience member, that target, in this case, again, I keep going back to your policy maker, is captivated at that highest point. And then it's coming back down and it's making sure that they understand your part of the story, how you are involved, how you helped to either address the struggle or maybe how you weren't able to address or fix the problem, fix the issue. And this is why you're reaching that closure. This is where the ask comes along. So again, for some of those on the call, you may have seen this before. This is a pretty common format or structure that now the New York Library Association and the American Library Association, uses when it comes to formatting your story for the perspective of advocacy. So following that structure that we just talked about, so those, those 6 points, moving up to the top, coming back down, similar. So this is just for your library. So this is a nice example. You'll actually get these slides afterwards, and I would actually encourage each of you to have these beside maybe your computer, or if you're like me, have them next to a notepad so you can actually take and scribble down notes and go ahead and start to structure your story in this way. So again, the first thing you want to do is introduce your hero. What I will say here is that while you want the library, or in this case, or maybe your organization, to act as a supporting role, they are not your hero. Your hero is your patron, or it's an individual that you serve and that you are able to support. So that's where your introduction is. From there, you're going to describe the problem. Why are you coming in? Why are you telling me this story? So that's that part. Next, you go into describing the library's intervention. So what role did they play within this story? Next, you go into connecting that intervention, so where the library came in, to the happy ending. What is it about the action, the services, the programs, the communication, the relationship that the library had that enabled or that propelled the story forward to go towards a resolution or a happy ending? kind of goes into the next year where you're talking about the work of the library, the work of those that come in every day. What is it about what they did that plays a role into that happy ending? These are the next two parts that, again, come back to who's your audience, who's your target, is it a policymaker? So now you're going to connect the solution to the priorities of your decision maker. Again, going back to making sure that you know who you're speaking to, get some information about them from their official web pages, can really be helpful for this part. And last but not least, it's connecting that ask to the priorities of your decision maker. So, there could be very general if it's a matter of speaking about, well, funding could have really assisted in this project or in this purpose or in this story. Or maybe it's an actual piece of policy, something specific that you can tie into that maybe that decision maker sits on that committee or that caucus. They have the ability to influence a final decision. So I know I'm throwing a ton at you, and when it comes to the story, maybe that seemed overwhelming, but what I want to come down to and what it really is at the end of the day is that when in doubt, use simple language. You all know the ability to empathize. Make sure that you are utilizing that, again, because you know who your target and who your audience is. You want to back your stories with data. And I didn't touch on this, but I'm sure you've all heard, and what I mentioned that, that metric I brought before, that 22 times more memorable. Know that stories are memorable, but there is the opportunity to plug in or to input data points. If you plug those points into your story, they're far more likely to remember those. And even if they don't say, you're saying the story, you finish, and they say to you, you said 20% of students or 20% of patients or patrons, then you're able to have the opportunity, extend that data, confirm or reaffirm what they've heard, and then maybe take it as an opportunity to provide even more information or where that information came from. Include that call to action or your ask. And remember that authentic stories will resonate well with people of any age, culture, or belief. Tailoring that story according to your audience is key. It really is just how you tell or you pitch a story that depends on the audience and the outcome. So those last few slides, again, I know I'm throwing so much at you guys, but that is all about tailoring your story or crafting your message as an individual. Now, over the last few months, I know I've spoken to quite a few folks out there that are like, well, how do I apply storytelling and crafting my message if I'm an organization, if I'm a system, if I'm a business? Because there are differences. And for some folks, they feel like, well, just, it's not a story if I'm just informing my audience or my target member of what I do. That's not really storytelling. So I'm hoping to give you all on the webinar today, the presentation today, some pointers or some information that maybe I haven't shared with you before. So unlike a personal story, business stories typically don't follow that same structure. One of the elements that they don't have is a resolution. This is probably turning everything around that I just told you on its head. I understand. So here are the 3 points that I want to focus on, and maybe will help craft those messages for the organizations, businesses, or systems that are on the presentation today. So organization-based stories or business stories are rarely about you or rarely about your role within your organization, your business. They're actually about your audience. So the focus is squarely on the patron or the benefiting agency, whether that be an agency itself, colleagues, or the decision maker that you're intending to motivate. So focus on the audience and understand that it is different than a personal story. Laying it out there. So again, unlike personal stories and going through that 6-step process of focusing on the hero, getting to the top, turning point, resolution, back down, you can, as a business, as an organization, focus less on the hero and less on the resolution, as I mentioned, and a bit more into that data, a bit more into those metrics. And unlike a personal story where I would typically try to sway you from using your characters in a negative tone or putting the whole story in that negative space, you can do that here. So as a business, as an organization, you can focus on, did you have a budget cut? Have you had to lay staff off? What are the consequences of inaction? That's really what you want to focus on. And again, because you aren't really setting it up to tell your story with a resolution, you can actually use that as an ask instead. Because your resolution hasn't yet occurred, so the audience can't vicariously experience your triumph like you can in a personal story, with business storytelling, the resolution is actually your prescribed strategy, your next steps, your call to action that will solve the conflict that you've demonstrated. So this is actually setting yourself up to say, I've brought you a solution, I've brought you my strategy, I've brought to you how you can contribute to our solution so that we can celebrate that triumph, so we can have a success together. It's making sure that your audience, your target, your policymaker is invested and trust in your strategy and those call to action so that they too feel compelled to be a part of that success with you. Again, shouldn't just say a little bit different than a personal story, very different. So I hope that helps some of you on the presentation today, sort of reframing. And I will say before I get into other slides that we are providing on the main registration page a folder where you can post your stories or your messages and receive feedback not only from your peers but also the hosts as well, so both Nyla and Winnie Lark. So that is available to you, and I hope you all use it, because I think from now until March we're going to see those stories really develop and change. So now that we've talked about so much, we've talked about the fundamentals and what advocacy is. We've talked about your audience and how to identify them. We've talked about how to craft an advocacy strategy from start to finish. We just talked about storytelling. Now we're going to use the last little section of today's webinar to talk about the different formats that you can use and highlight some of the different tools that are available to you. Now, we're not going to go into specificity. Again, I hope to do that in the future and provide you some more tools for your arsenal, but I do hope what we provide in the next few slides is helpful. So there are two real formats, I suppose I would call them, for advocacy. They are lobbying or direct communication and campaigning. So I know lobbying seems to be like a no-no word, so take it as direct communication. This involves influencing through direct communication with decision makers, with your audience. So think like in-person meetings. That's what a direct communication is. Now, campaigning involves speaking publicly on an issue with a view to generate a response from the wider public and using a variety of techniques. Those techniques or tools are what we're going to be going over. So I know it sounds very political, but think about it just as in person and maybe like virtual or electronic, different methods. The choice of format or the method will vary depending on your target audience, the message that you're trying to convey, what resources are available, and even the cultural and socioeconomic context. So we're going to focus on that direct communication first. I'm going to go through some things that probably are the most familiar and probably the most comfortable methods that are out there. So let's talk about that in person. So these are just some examples of in-person or direct communication. You have your meetings, you have workshops and training opportunities, marches, gatherings, you have public hearings, and then special events. So let's talk about meetings first. So face-to-face meetings, it's what we're all the most comfortable with. It's all what we're familiar and we're used to doing. We've all, I would say, hopefully all of us have had the opportunity to engage, whether it is with a policymaker or even if, again, if you're talking about a promotion or a raise or your place within your field or within your industry. So these face-to-face meetings can be small, all the way up to large or mass groups. There's typically, if you have a group with you who's advocating for a purpose, typically you have a leader in the room. You work through your talking points, you make sure that you are providing that ask. One or several of you go through your stories in a really concise way to make sure that it relates back to the data. You're pulling at those heartstrings. The great part of face-to-face is not only is it what we're familiar with, but it offers us the ability to shorten or expand our messaging based on a variety of reasons. It can be based on who our target or who the policymaker is. It could be based on the time allotted, the tone from the room. What are the inquiries that are provided? Again, this is probably the most common familiar format within direct communication. What we are all coming to become familiar with, and I won't say enjoy, because I'm sure some of those on the presentation right now don't love virtual meetings and all of the go-to or Zoom meetings that we are a part of, but they are really a way to highlight or stack the deck when it comes to those that you're speaking to in the network that you have surrounded yourself with. So what makes e-meetings or virtual meetings different than your in-person meetings or your face-to-face? So I'm going to try to touch about them in a positive light. So the good thing is you can provide some lengthy data or those more quantitative data ahead of time, or something that might be lengthy like a memorandum. You can do that all ahead of time so that when it comes time for the actual meeting, you can use those as a reference and provide more anecdotal or unique experiences and stories. The obvious is that you don't need to travel anywhere, that you can stack your day with as many meetings as you think possible and whether you can tolerate. So you don't need to worry about that travel. There's the other part of this, which is you can be far more comfortable sitting behind your screen, making sure that you have notes up on your screen if you'd like them, make sure that you're feeling a little bit more confident, plus you could be comfy. I know most of you on this presentation have heard me said, people don't know if you're in sweatpants or if you have pants on at all. So benefit of the virtual meeting. Again, I mentioned the fact that you can have those notes up on the screen. And if you are participating in a group virtual meeting, you can actually set itineraries and roles ahead of time. This allows you to prepare all of the participants ahead of time, and also it assists in timing and knowing that you're going to get through all of your material in the allotted time. And also, for the individual, say you have 10 people on, they know when they're, for lack of better phrase, on deck. They know who they're going to follow. So some other things that maybe aren't great about virtual meetings, or just some reminders or things to keep in the back of your mind. Know that you can't, or it's much more difficult to read body cues, on a webcam and on an itty bitty screen that looks like Brady Bunch. Also, you'll want to really make sure that you're rehearsing those stories or those talking points ahead. I would say no more than 1 to 2 minutes. But I suppose on the flip side of that, you can practice by yourself ahead of time. Again, making sure that you're prepared. So sort of the differences between your face-to-face and your virtual. And I really wanted to highlight those two because I do think we are going to continue seeing virtual meetings or e-advocacy moving forward. So again, some tips, tricks, and things to keep in the back of your mind as we move forward. Now we're going to move on to, again, looking at these formats for advocacy. We've talked about direct communication a bit in those in-person. Now we're going to move on to the second part, those campaigning. Now, we're going to touch on campaigning and the different elements in two separate parts. We're going to talk about tangible mediums, and then we're going to talk about some electronic options. So again, most of these that are on your screen right now, you should feel pretty comfortable with. They should all be familiar to you. So they're things that you know. They are a letter, they're a newsletter, they're brochures and pamphlets, invitations, op-eds. The one part I did add on here that people do forget about is wearables. Now, wearables can be your t-shirts, your bumper stickers, your hats, something that has maybe your logo or slogan or something, an image or a phrase that connects a broader audience or those unaware to your purpose, to your organization, to you. Now we're going to talk about some electronic options and what's available to you. So some familiar and maybe not so familiar. So I think we all know email. So that those can be in different formats too. I didn't put like e-newsletters or blasts on there, but again, that's all a part of email, whether it is mass or individual, whatever you want to do. Then there are take action campaigns and petitions. So some of your organizations or some of your libraries may do this on their own, those take action campaigns, but you might also be a part of petitions too. And if you haven't participated or you haven't created them for your organization or library, I'm sure you've all seen them. NYLA and ALA both utilize those take action campaigns through a format called CQ Engage. And petitions, we've done them in the past, but the first sort of format or I guess entity that comes to my mind when I think about petitions is change.org. That is a platform where an individual or just a general member of public can create different petitions, but you also have businesses utilizing that format as well. You've got surveys and polls. You've got a vlog or a blog. And for those that don't know, a blog is just a video blog. You have radio, your social media platforms. I did not list them all out, but when we're talking about advocacy, especially with social media, the triple threat, I would say, is Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are starting to see some different advocacy and some stories being shared on different platforms such as Snapchat and TikTok, but that is all about knowing your audience and what is the message that you are trying to distribute or get across. There are GIFs, which are just moving images, short little videos, and then you have photographs and videos. Now, again, I do not have the time to get into each of these, but I do want to focus on the social media platforms because I have a feeling that's what many of you on this presentation are really looking for. So again, we've gone through all of these different options that you have. And for most of you, I would assume who are on this presentation, you understand the use or how to post a basic message on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And if you don't worry, I'll send you information after this. But again, those are pretty basic. So I want to focus on maybe things beyond the basic that you wouldn't think of that hopefully you can take away today and put in your arsenal or in your toolkit and use for your advocacy strategy moving forward. So I'm going to touch on 5 different parts or 5 different uses for social media platforms. So the first is live streaming. So live streaming has been a part of Facebook for a few years now, and it's also a part of Instagram now. It's a highly engaging way to connect with your supporters. It presents opportunities for people to interact that normally wouldn't exist. In fact, Facebook Live videos generate 6 times the interactions that normal videos do. Another part of using live streaming, either it's on Facebook or Instagram, is that live videos, once you're done streaming, it becomes a video that people can watch later on. On top of that, in particular, because Facebook and Instagram are now connected, their algorithm loves video. It especially loves live video. It continues to pop up in your feed and floats to the top of individuals' feeds. I bring that up because, as we all know, social media platforms are constantly evolving. So being able to identify these different trends and changing algorithms only add to your social strategies that you all have in place already. Let's talk about professional platforms. So I don't know if any of you in the back of your mind are like, what is a professional social platform? LinkedIn. It's often forgotten. It's the largest professional network in the world, and it can provide you an audience that is maybe unknown, or it's an untapped network. For associations, nonprofits, libraries, those who are in the more social-facing industries, it's where your professionals or like-minded individuals and those with influence reside, for lack of a better term. So that I would highly, highly recommend making sure that at least you have a LinkedIn page. And if you're going to post on any of the other social platforms, go ahead, take the extra 30 seconds, just copy and paste it right in there. You never know if you're going to have the opportunity to expand that network, and maybe going back to that audience engagement roadmap, identify a potential supporter or advocate. The third bullet on here is your branded accounts. Now, this is about, what I mean by this is creating an account separate from your organization or separate from your business or yourself as an individual for your particular cause or campaign. It's a great way to drive awareness and action. And by creating that extra account, if you are an individual, then you have your organization and you have an action, you now have 3, or I should say 2 additional touch points. So for example, I have my individual Facebook and Instagram page, Nyla has their page, and then maybe we create a page for Library Advocacy Day. There are now 3 different touch points, and we're building and expanding that potential network that's going to see that information. So it creates a strong focus on your campaign or whatever your cause is, and it essentially creates a hub for people to engage with that might not be directly related to your general purpose. So it just gives them an extra format, or that extra place to engage with. Advertisements. So this really you could call it advertisements, or you could call it paid posting. So this offers or provides the ability to create highly targeted audiences within your social media. So it's using an algorithm, and it's making sure that it is getting in front of the correct people at the ideal time. With Facebook and Instagram, you can actually create really engaging visual content that drives measurable action. And there are different, I would say, levels of financial input. So you can do it for pretty cheap. You can do it for 1 post, or if you want to do it on a more regular basis, you can do that as well. And last but not least on here is banners and frames. Now, I think some of you have probably seen these or even used them. So what better way to generate awareness and show your cause as a united front than having imagery where people can wear it as a badge or a banner right on their profile photo? So there are lots of different ways. I know I've seen it for the Susan Komen Association or cause. I've seen it for walks. I've seen it for the Alzheimer's Association. I've even seen it for one-day events. These banners or these frames can be used not only on Facebook and Instagram, but they are incredibly popular as a frame or as a filter on say like Snapchat or TikTok or different things. And if you use that frame on Facebook, because now Facebook is directly connected to Twitter, or you can connect them, you can also change your profile image on Twitter, which tends to be a bit more of a professional network or setting, to include that frame or that banner as well. So again, just hopefully some different ways or thinking beyond the basic posts, some ways that maybe you can utilize the same social platforms that you've been utilizing in a different way, or in the case of maybe that LinkedIn, expanding the network and the potential audience you have for your causes and your goals. Now, I just wanted to take a quick minute or two before we turn it over to questions and any feedback that you all have, to just do a quick wrap up. I know we covered a lot in 70 minutes here. So again, we've gone over the fundamentals. What is advocacy? What are the different kinds of advocacy? We've gone over 2 different roadmaps. We've gone over the audience engagement roadmap, which is all about identifying potential advocates and supporters. And then we've gone to an advocacy roadmap. So once you identify those people, you inform them and you want them to act. Well, what's your strategy? What's that roadmap that you're going to use from, to get them to act on your behalf, to hopefully get your target or your audience to act on your behalf? So we've gone over that. We talked a bit about crafting your message and creating your stories and different methods and tricks to bolster your story as an individual and as an organization or business. And we've also gone over some different tools. So we've gone over that direct communication, and we've gone over campaigning, which involves both tangible and virtual mediums, as well as, in-person and virtual meetings. And just before I go over to questions, I do want to just highlight the different programs that are coming up. We have the next session, which is on Tuesday, November 24th. It is going to be with the Right Question Institute. It's going to be talking about building people's self-advocacy skills. In December, we have the Legislature in the Libraries program. We are going to have a slew of members from the legislature, both the Assembly and Senate, join us, and we're going to be talking about sort of 2020, the year that wasn't. We'll talk about 2021, the different cohort that they're now a part of, and how we can really leverage libraries and our message within the walls of the Legislative Office Building in Capitol. We have the first program of the new year, which is Empowerment Through Self-Advocacy. We have 4 amazing, talented women who will be joining us on a panel. We have Donna Collins, who is the editor of the Buffalo Business First. We have Liz Benjamin, which I think some of you on the presentation know. She used to be a part of Capitol Tonight. She used to be the host. Now she is with Marathon Strategies as a political consultant. We have Lauren Moore as the state librarian for New York, and we have Georgine Jones, which will be a new face for many, if not all of you. She is the chief of staff for Senator Alexandra Biaggi. So really, really phenomenal women on that panel. And then the last two, I know it's hard to think about February and March, we will talk about the budget with Brian Hildreth, who is the executive director of the Southern Tier Library System. And then the last program will actually be a little bit of state, a little bit of federal. We will be talking, it'll be a wrap up of all of our different events. We will be speaking with Megan Kusik from the American Library Association, and I will be joining you for that as well. And just in case you wanted it and you have any questions that maybe are coming to mind after we close down this presentation, this is my contact information. Know that you can always reach out. I'm always happy to answer questions or review any of those wonderful stories I'm sure you are all going to create over the next few months. I'm going to now pop over to the chat and see if we have any questions. Ooh, Heidi, yeah, great question. So she said, I would be interested to see how many or what percentage of individuals on LinkedIn identify as a librarian or a library worker. Certainly an interesting data point. I'm not quite sure how we could do that. Maybe I could reach out to LinkedIn, but a super interesting question and something to think about. But know that a part of using that professional platform is not only those who are in your profession or who are in your industry, but who are peripheral, and those partnerships or coalitions that you could create, or just general supporters. Allison, do you find that letter writing, email, virtual petitions actually have an effect on the legislature? So yes and no. Having been on the other side, so again, my current role is the Director of Government Relations and Advocacy here at NYLA, but I also worked on the inside as well. I've worked for 2 different assembly members and a senator, and I will say those general, I would call them blast messages that you sometimes see, same subject line, same content in the letter, and you see 700 of them get put into an inbox or they get faxed, because yes, they all still use faximile. Those are not helpful as far as the, I would say, content is concerned, because again, there is an individual or unique messaging happening. However, because of the sheer quantity of those, sometimes those messages will be brought forward in conference. So it's like, you know, they're commiserating. They're saying like, did anyone else receive 1,200 messages about declawing of cats? And so again, maybe it doesn't become a priority on the agenda, but I suppose at least it brings it up into conversation. So it depends on what you define as effective. But when you're talking about petitions or other letter writing campaigns where you offer your audience or your participants the ability to change the subject line and add individual stories or different data within the larger message or body, I do think those are helpful, because they do stand out that yes, it's a unified effort, you're all talking about the same purpose or goal, but you have individual voices. I think the other element, an important point to bring up in that, is that make sure that you are directly communicating with your representatives. I know for, you know, the outlier is if we're talking about an issue that's sitting, say, in the library community, you may also want to CC your message or your letter to the chair of that committee. But if it's not your representative, to say that they don't care might be a little bit blunt, but they're there to represent. They were elected to represent those in their district, their residents, you know, with the general guise of, yes, you want the greater good for all of New York. So Do handwritten letters with a story get a better chance of, yes, I would say yes, absolutely. Certainly the amount of virtual mail or virtual messaging that the legislators and their staff see has increased probably 20-fold. So yes, anytime that you can send something tangible certainly helps. But with that, I would also say, if you're going to ask 300 people to do a letter writing campaign, make sure that those messages are different and unique and you're not all just taking a basic template. But as an individual, to reach out and to engage with your legislator in that way, in a tangible format, is really great. It also provides the opportunity for follow-up. So you could certainly write in that tangible letter and say, I will be following up, via phone or with email with more data, something like that. Allison, also, don't some legislators prefer email for safety reasons? Certainly, especially, well, I shouldn't even say especially now. I'll be really interested to see how tangible mail is dealt with, moving forward because of COVID and just us continuing to learn, when it can be transmitted or how it can be transmitted. But I also know that I was within the legislature, within the Senate, when there were, at least to my knowledge, 10 anthrax scares that were happening through direct mail. And at that time, they definitely started sorting, and there was a caution level that I had not seen before. So again, it's knowing what tools and what mediums are available to you and trying to choose which medium for what purpose. Jim, what do you think of storytelling from a public library, not with a specific actionable goal in mind, but in light of uncertain economic times and scary budgets, to serve as a simple reminder for patrons? And yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a part of advocacy is not always just about a specific ask, a specific number, but oftentimes it's just to simply inform or can, build that rapport that you currently have. So I would say, informing or engaging with your audience, I'm going to say a policymaker, about what your public library is doing. Get beyond the basics. What's changed? Is there anything unique? Is there, especially with COVID in mind, like highlight the work that you've been doing and any changes. And that can be a part of your story as well. But yeah, certainly I know I really focused heavily on that ask, but not all stories need an ask. Certainly they don't. So I hope that addresses what you were talking about, Jim. But yeah, absolutely. General messaging and stories at any given time is a wonderful use of your effort and can really make an impact. Yeah, and Heidi mentioned, she was like, we want to make sure that we're advocating all the time. I know I actually said this, gosh, time blends together, but I think it was last week that, for much of the community and for those that maybe aren't a professional advocate like myself, we fall into this idea that advocacy has a season. And in New York, because of the way our legislature is formatted and structured, most people think that it goes January to June, where my argument is that it's always advocacy season. It's just the messaging within that season changes. So understanding that, yes, in a typical year, I'm going to throw 2020 out because it does not count because it hasn't fit any of the rules. But typically in any given year, or any given session, it's 2 years. So from January to June, that your representative is going to be traveling back and forth to Albany and spending maybe 1 to 2 days in their district office. Now, they should at all times have staff in both offices. Some elected officials have more than 2 offices, so they'll always have staff. What changes is that when June rolls around, at least in that first year, they're going to spend June through December in their district. They're going to have much more intimate contact with their constituents. So when it comes to, again, we're talking about in-person or virtual meetings, know that that June to December part of the year is a great opportunity for you to have a much more quality, in-depth conversation and interaction with your elected official. That's in the first year. The second year, they come back. The change in the second year, which we saw this year, is that as soon as they hit June, they're really focused in their district for their election, for their campaign, if they're going to run again. So things do change a little bit in the second year. But again, I would just always argue that it's always advocacy season. It's just what part in that season are we in? What are we talking about? In what depth and what information can we provide that we can keep that message rolling forward and just get a little bit more specific each time around that we're speaking with our audience or our policymaker. We've decided to share the thank yous and notes of appreciation from our patrons with the policymakers to show them what the community values of our services. What do you think of such method? I think that's awesome. I think it's a great way to showcase the direct impact that you have within your community and within much of the association's messaging. I'm sorry, we talk a lot about perspective and identifying. It's like your constituents are our patrons. So making that connection, I think, is such a brilliant way to showcase your value and the services and the programs that you provide, and any changes that have occurred over the last few months because of the pandemic specifically. So yeah, love that. Heidi, so said, maybe create a monthly strategy of sending a message once a week to a different sector. Week 1, message to legislators. Week 2, message to the local media. Yeah, so again, what you're talking about, the theory is wonderful. Again, I want to take it back to that advocacy map and making sure that you have a built out strategy before you start interacting, or I would just say, before you just start sending messages left and right. Make sure that there is a strategy there of who your audience is. And again, making sure that your messaging, your stories, whatever the ask is, make sure that you're tailoring it to whoever the audience is. You don't want to send the same message because it might just fall flat if, if it isn't directly related, pertinent, or going to, or it's not impactful, influential in that particular sector or that person's life, if that makes sense. And I'll give everyone a few more minutes, but I do just want to thank everyone for taking, an hour and a half out of your morning to be on this presentation with me. I know we went through so much information today. Again, we will be providing all of this information to those who registered, and there is that folder that I talked about on the event registration page, where it is a platform for you to share any of the stories that you want to maybe start using in any meetings, or maybe it's just different messaging that you want to try out in the future in your advocacy strategies. So know that that is available to you. If you don't feel comfortable placing it in that folder and having your peers view it, you can always send it to me as well. And seeing no more questions, again, I just want to thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing you for our next session on November 24th. Thank you so much, everyone.